Right now, half the internet is in love with a Korean king. He is gorgeous, he is a little bit broken, and he takes one bite of a bowl of bibimbap made by a time-traveling chef, and you can practically watch the ice melt off him. 43 million hours of watch time. People in Manila and Mexico City and Manchester stayed up past midnight crying over this man. And almost none of them realize they are swooning over one of the most hated rulers who ever lived. Because here's the part the show never tells you. That king was real. They changed his name for the drama, but he existed. He sat on that throne, and the real man is not a wounded foodie waiting to be saved by the love of a good chef. According to Korean historians, he is the single worst tyrant in 500 years of Joseon history. Possibly the worst in all of Korea's. The kind of ruler whose name curdled into a word ordinary people still say today. And by the end of this video, you are going to hear that word coming out of your own mouth a little differently. The drama hands him a tragic past and heals it with a home-cooked meal. The real story opens with a scrap of cloth soaked in a dying woman's blood, pressed into the hands of her little boy. And it heals absolutely no one. It ends with hundreds gone, graves torn open, and 20,000 families dragged out of their homes so one man could go hunting. On screen, he gets the love of his life and a second chance across time itself. What actually happened to him is the exact inverse. And honestly, it might be the most satisfying fall from grace in Korean history. So let's separate the two. This is the king Netflix served you, and this is the man the records actually remember. Welcome to Hearts in History, where we take the stories that wrecked you and show you what really happened. If you love a beautiful drama, but you also want the true story hiding underneath it, the one with all the sharp edges left in, subscribe and stick with me, because this one has a twist near the end that the show could never touch. Hit like while you're here. It genuinely helps me keep making these. Now let's talk about the most delicious lie on Netflix. If you somehow missed it, Bon Appétit, Your Majesty, dropped in the fall of 2025 and basically colonized the Netflix charts. 12 episodes. It cracked the global top 10 in 93 countries, hit number 1 in 23 of them, and camped at number 2 worldwide for weeks. It was big enough that Netflix bragged about it in an actual earnings report, which is the corporate version of a standing ovation. The premise is pure comfort fantasy. Yeonsangun, played by Yoona, is a French-trained Korean chef who wins a huge cooking competition in Paris. On the flight home, a solar eclipse does what solar eclipses apparently do in K-dramas, and she wakes up 500 years in the past, in the middle of a royal hunting ground in early Joseon. And there, she meets him, King Lee Heon, played by Lee Chae-min, sold to us as, and I quote the show's own framing, the best gourmet and the worst tyrant. A young king with a mouth like a Michelin inspector and a childhood full of trauma. Ji-young cooks her way from prisoner to palace chef, one impossible dish at a time. Gochujang butter bibimbap, a snowflake schnitzel, sous vide in the 1500s. And slowly, bite by bite, she thaws the cold king into someone who remembers what warmth feels like. It is genuinely gorgeous television. The food styling alone could sell a cookbook, and the emotional engine underneath it is that oldest, most reliable K-drama machine. He is damaged, she is the only one who sees the boy under the monster. Love, apparently, is a really good marinade. Now here is what the show is very careful about. It never once says the name Yeonsangun. It calls him Lee Heon, a king who does not appear in any real history book. That is not an accident, and it is the first thread we're going to pull. Because the original web novel this is based on did not bother with the disguise. It used the real king, out loud. Somebody along the way decided that name needed to be buried before this became a romance. Keep that question in your pocket for a second. Why does a love story need to hide who its leading man really was? Let me introduce you to the man behind the mask. His birth name was Lee Heon. He was born in 1476, the eldest surviving son of King Seongjong, and he took the throne of Joseon in 1494 as its 10th king. For about 12 years he ruled, and when it was over, the people who removed him did something they almost never did to a king. They refused to give him one. Stay with me here, because this is a loop I want you to hold all the way to the end. Every proper Joseon king earns a specific honor after he passes, a title that marks him as a legitimate, remembered ruler. The name history files him under forever. Think Sejong, Songjong, that sound on the end. This king was denied it. What they called him instead, and the ice-cold verdict hidden inside that one small word, is exactly where I'm going to land this whole story. For now, just sit with this. In 500 years of the dynasty, only 2 rulers were ever thrown off the throne and never, ever forgiven. He is one of them. And the punishment they chose is stitched into how we are allowed to say his name to this very day. That is who Lee Heon really is. That is the man they had to rename before Yuna could fall in love with him. And to understand how a promising young king curdled into the worst tyrant his country ever produced, we have to go back before he was born, to a woman most of the world only knows as a footnote, and to the single object that turned a private grief into a reign of terror. Here's a thing the drama actually keeps. Its king is haunted by a lost mother. And so is the real one. The difference is that the show uses the wound to make you love him. History used it to explain a rising body count. His mother was a woman remembered now only as deposed Queen Yun. She came from the Hamin Yun clan, and she did not start as a queen. She started as a concubine of King Seongjong, and when his first queen passed away without a son, Yun got the golden ticket. She was elevated to queen consort in 1476, and that same year, she gave the king what a queen was for: a son and heir. The little boy who would become Yeonsangun. And then it fell apart. The records paint her as jealous and volatile, furious at the king's other concubines. There's a famous, juicy legend that in a rage, she scratched King Seongjong across the face and drew blood, and that this was the beginning of the end for her. Now, I have to do the honest history thing here because this channel does not smooth over the uncertain parts. That face-scratching story does not actually appear in the official annals of the dynasty. It survives mostly in unofficial private histories and gossip, which means it might be pure legend. But something real did happen, because in 1479, she was stripped of her title and deposed. And in 1482, after officials kept pressing, she was ordered to take poison. That was the sentence, and she was made to drink it. And this is the detail that matters, the one that becomes the seed of everything. Before she was gone, according to the story that got passed down, she gave a piece of cloth stained with her own blood to her mother and asked her to keep it for her son. A message across the years. Remember what they did to me. Her little boy did not know any of this. That's the cruelest part. Yeonsangun was raised believing that a different woman, his father's next queen, was his real mother. He grew up as crown prince inside a lie, calling a stranger mother, with no idea that his actual mother had been forced to swallow poison on the say-so of the very court he was being trained to rule. He was a child sitting on a secret that no one had the courage to tell him. Imagine being handed that truth as an adult, as a king. Imagine the moment someone finally puts that blood-stained cloth in your hands. The drama gives its king a soft, sad, tragic version of this ache, the kind a good bowl of soup can start to fix. The real king got the raw version, and there was no chef coming to save him. In 1504, a court official named Im Sa-hong laid it all out for him. The deposition, the poison, and, the sources say, the blood-soaked garment itself. This is the point where a grieving man became something else entirely. Quick gut check before we go into the dark part, because I want to know where your head is at. Watching the show, did you buy the tragic backstory as a reason to forgive him? Or were you side-eyeing it the whole time? Tell me in the comments, because the gap between wounded and excused is the entire subject of this video. Here's an irony I could not have written better myself. The first time Yeonsangun turned the court into a house of horrors, it was over a history book. 6 years before the bloodstained robe, back in 1498, there was a purge that Koreans call the Muo Sawa, the first of the great literati purges. The spark was almost absurdly small. A scholar named Kim Il-sun had tucked a short passage into the draft of the official state chronicle. That passage quietly criticized an old coup, the way an earlier king, Sejong, had seized the throne generations before. To a certain faction at court, that was not history. That was treason written in ink. They took it to the young king, and he came down like a hammer. Kim Il-sun and a whole cluster of scholars from the idealistic Sarim faction were wiped out. And it did not stop at the living. The mentor at the center of the school of thought, a man who was already gone, named Kim Jong-tik, had his body dug up and desecrated. There's a specific, chilling word for that in Korean court punishment. desecrating a man who is already in the ground by defiling his remains. That was Yeonsangun's answer to a paragraph he did not like. And honestly, the warning lights were flashing even earlier than that. Barely after he took the throne, before any of the great tragedies fully unfolded, he'd already had one of his own royal tutors eliminated. Sit with the irony of that. The man whose entire job was to teach the young king wisdom and restraint became one of the first to learn that this king did not intend to be restrained by anyone. The people closest enough to guide him were the first to find out how dangerous he was. So before the personal tragedy ever fully detonated, the pattern was already there. Criticism equals the end. Even those already gone are not safe. Even words on a page are a capital crime. Hold on to that, because the show wants you to believe love could have redirected this man. The record suggests the cruelty was load-bearing long before anyone handed him a reason. And then someone handed him a reason.
The second purge is the one that earns him the title. It's called the Gabja Sawa, and it happened in 1504, the same year he was shown the truth about his mother. If the first purge was politics, this one was personal, and personal is so much worse. Once he knew, he went hunting for everyone he blamed. 2 of his own father's concubines, women he held responsible for turning the old king against his mother, he is said to have beaten until they were gone, with his own hand in it. His grandmother, the powerful Grand Royal Queen Dowager Insu, got caught in one of these confrontations, and by several accounts, he shoved her, and she was gone not long after. Sit with that image for a second. A king so far gone that he knocks down his own grandmother inside the palace. Then he went after the officials. Anyone connected to his mother's fate, anyone who had signed off on it, anyone who had merely been standing in the room and failed to stop it. The numbers that survive are staggering. Something like 239 people were punished in this single purge, and of those, more than 120 were eliminated, or, if they'd had the nerve to already be gone, dug up and desecrated like Kim Jong-jik before them. One long-gone statesman named Han Myung-ho, a giant of the previous reigns, had his grave torn open and his remains desecrated. Scholars think the true reach, once you count everyone ruined by association under Joseon's guilt by bloodline laws, ran into the thousands. And he did not want to hear a single word about it. This is the part that tells you exactly what kind of ruler he'd become. He abolished the offices whose entire job was to criticize the king. In Joseon, that was a real institutional thing. There were censors, official watchdogs, whose sworn duty was to tell the king when he was wrong. Yeonsangun gutted them. And then he made his remaining officials wear a plaque, a little sign on their body, engraved with a warning. The wording is something like this: "A mouth is a door that lets in disaster. A tongue is a blade that can end you. Keep your mouth shut and your tongue deep, and your body will be safe." He made them wear the muzzle. He turned "shut up or else" into palace dress code. There is a version of this man Netflix wants you to picture brooding handsomely over a beautifully plated meal. Here is the version the records kept. A king who made his own advisors walk around wearing a threat against their own throats. Now let's talk about food, because the whole show hangs on it, and this is where the drama is doing something sneakier than you might realize. It takes a real, documented truth about this king and quietly flips its meaning. First, the setting is real. Joseon royal dining was not just fancy dinner. It was theater. It was politics. It was the cosmos on a table. The king's spread had a name, the surasang, and it followed rules that sound made up until you learn how serious they were. A full royal table carried 12 special side dishes, the 12 chop, a number reserved for the king alone. He ate 5 times a day, with 2 grand main meals built around rice and soup and stew and grilled and fermented everything. The ingredients arrived as monthly tribute from all 8 provinces of the kingdom, so that the king was, quite literally, eating the whole country at once, a taste of every region laid before one man as a sign that all of it answered to him. And the food came with bodyguards. Court women called surasangung ran the king's table, and part of their job was making sure nothing on it would harm him. Poison was a real and constant fear, so dishes were checked before the king ever lifted a spoon. So when the drama makes a chef into a figure of intimacy and danger and trust, that's not fantasy. In that world, the person who controlled what went into the king's mouth held his life in their hands. That part, the show gets beautifully right. Here's the flip. The drama takes a king obsessed with food and turns that appetite into something tender, a love language, a door back to his humanity. The real Yeonsangun was absolutely a man of appetite.
Feasts, pleasure, indulgence, endless entertainment. But in the records, that appetite is not charming. It is a symptom. His feasting was the sound of a kingdom being drained dry for one man's mouth. And to understand just how dry, I have to introduce you to a word millions of Koreans still use today, casually, probably without ever knowing it was born from this exact king's parties. To throw those endless feasts, Yeonsangun needed entertainers. A lot of them. So he did something monstrous at scale. He sent agents across the country to round up women, thousands of them, pulled from the 8 provinces to sing and dance and serve at the palace. The show actually gestures at this. In the very first episode, there's a woman hiding to avoid exactly this kind of roundup. That's not invented. That terror was real. He even created special officials just for the harvesting, and history remembers them by names that sound like poetry until you realize what they mean. The Chaehongsa, which translates to something like the collectors of red, were sent out to gather grown women. The Chechongsa, the collectors of green, went after the young girls. Collectors, as if the women of an entire kingdom were a crop to be brought in by season. When these men rode into a village, families hid their daughters in cellars and under floors, which again is exactly the fear the show opens on. The gathered women had a name. They were called Unpyeong, and the ones selected as the cream, the ones brought right into the palace for the king's own pleasure, got an upgraded name, Humcheong. Picture the resources that took. The silk, the food, the housing, the sheer money, all of it hemorrhaging out of the treasury and into one long party, while the country groaned under the bill. And that word, Humcheong, never left the language. It survives today inside the common Korean expression Humcheong Mangcheong, which means to blow money wildly, to splurge, to squander like there's no tomorrow. When a modern Korean says someone is spending Humcheong Mangcheong, they are, without knowing it, invoking the ghost of this king's ruinous banquets. His excess got so notorious, it fossilized into everyday slang. That is a kind of infamy most tyrants can only dream of. 5 centuries later, his gluttony is still in people's mouths, hiding in plain sight. And there's a detail I have to give the show credit for grounding in truth. It has a jester, a clown figure in the court. There really was one. The royal chronicles of this reign record an entertainer named Gongid, a court performer famous enough that centuries later he inspired one of Korea's most acclaimed films about this exact era. So when the drama drops a jester into the palace, that's a wink at the real record, not a costume choice. But the pleasure grounds needed space too, so Yeonsangun took it. He shut down the Sungkyunkwan, the highest Confucian academy in the entire kingdom, the sacred brain of the state, the place that produced its scholars and officials, and he converted it into a personal playground. He did the same to Buddhist temples. He was, in fact, the only Joseon king who ever seriously tried to dismantle Buddhism in the country. And when he wanted hunting grounds, he leveled an enormous residential district of the capital and, by the accounts that survive, drove out something like 20,000 people from their homes. 20,000 families evicted so a king could chase deer. Comment me something honestly. If you'd been a young woman in one of those provinces or a family in that district, and you'd known what the throne really was, could you still root for the soft-eyed king in the show? Because this is the exact tension the drama is built to make you forget. The show needs a bad woman, because our king has to stay lovable. So it hands the villainy to a scheming consort, Kang Mok-ju, who manipulates the king and terrorizes the palace. And she has a real ancestor, though the truth is messier than the makeup. Her name was Jang Nok-soo, and she is a genuinely fascinating, tragic, awful figure. She was born low, around 1474, with a mother from the lowest social class, and she actually lived part of her life as a servant before becoming a kiseng, a court entertainer. The records are almost rude about her looks. Only ordinary beauty, they say. But she had a youthful spark and a real gift for music, and when Yeonsangun heard her perform, he was gone. He elevated her, showered her family with wealth, and made her his favorite. By 1503, she held a high consort rank, and her influence was so total that people said she handled the king like he was a baby, and that rewards and punishments across the court flowed through her. She got greedy with it, tearing down her own grand house just to build a grander one. So yes, there was a powerful woman near this king, But notice the sleight of hand the drama pulls. By making the consort the schemer and the king a wounded romantic, the show quietly moves the blame. In the real story, Jang Nok-soo did not corrupt an innocent king. She rose inside the machine of a tyrant who was already what he was. She was a passenger on the tyranny, not the driver. The drama needs a her so it can excuse a him. History is not nearly so generous to either of them. There's one more real outrage worth naming. In 1504, anonymous posters appeared attacking the king, and they were written in Hangul, the Korean alphabet. His response was to try to ban the alphabet itself. He ordered that people using Hangul be reported, that offenders be punished, that books written in it be burned. Think about that. A Korean king trying to strangle the Korean writing system because someone used it to tell the truth about him. The ban did not fully hold, and the irony is that he himself went back to using Hangul translations within a year or two, because you cannot actually erase a language. But he tried. He is the king who tried to burn the alphabet to silence a complaint.
Okay, I've been swinging hard, so let me be fair, because the show is not lying to you as much as you might think. It's selecting. The lost mother is real. The poison is real. The blood-stained cloth is in the story that came down to us. The roundup of women is real, right down to that opening image of someone hiding to escape it. The obsession with food and pleasure is real. The closing of the Great Academy is real. The powerful low-born consort is real. The court jester is real. Even the fine grain of the food world, the tasting for poison, the tribute ingredients, the ceremony of the royal table, all of that is grounded in genuine Joseon practice. The drama did its homework on the texture of this world. That's why it feels so rich. What it changed is not the facts, it's the frame. It took a documented monster and asked one question the records never ask. What if he could have been saved? What if the right person, with the right dish, at the right moment, could have reached the wounded boy before the tyrant hardened? That's a beautiful question. It's a fantasy question. And the reason it's a fantasy is sitting in the next section, in what actually happened to him, with no chef, no eclipse, and no mercy.
Here's a whole layer most international fans never see, and it's the thing that makes this drama quietly controversial back home.
Inside Korea, you cannot simply serve up Yeonsangun as a swoony, wounded prince, because everyone there already knows the punchline. His name is a synonym for tyrant. Building a tender redemption romance around him is a bit like building one around the most infamous villain your entire country was raised on. The delicious tension the show is trying to sell you, the thrill of loving someone you know you shouldn't, only fully works if you already know how bad he was. And a huge slice of the global audience simply doesn't. The Korean-American writers who've actually dug into this reign do not mince words. The novelist Jun-Hur, who set a whole book inside the terror of Yeonsangun's court, lays it out flat. He stole half of Gyeonggi province from ordinary people to build a private hunting ground. He turned the Sungyunkwan Academy into a pleasure den. He lit off 2 brutal purges. And the list, she says, just keeps going. That is the man under the eyeliner, not a misunderstood gourmet, a predator with a national treasury. And critics reviewing the show flagged the exact discomfort. One pointed out that most viewers outside South Korea will never realize Yeonsangun was, by every account, a despised ruler, which means a lot of people are swooning over a monster without the context that's supposed to make the romance feel dangerous rather than just dreamy. The same review caught the show gently cheating to keep him lovable. The real Yeonsangun would have had a mouthy, insubordinate concubine eliminated without blinking. The drama's Lee Heon lets it slide, because a leading man who casually does away with people for irritating him is not someone you can put on a poster. The softening isn't a bug, it's the entire product. So let me put this one straight to you, because it's a genuine debate, and I flip on it myself. Does a show like this owe its international audience a little heads up, a note that says this man was one of the worst rulers in Korean history? Or is it fair game to romance anyone you like, as long as the history obsessives show up in the comments to fill in what got left out? Tell me honestly where you land.
Quick spoiler warning for the next minute or so, both for the show's finale and for how history really closes the book. If you have not finished the drama and you want the ending clean, Skip ahead about 90 seconds. Everyone else, come with me. The drama gives its king something like grace. Without spoiling every beat, Jeong's presence bends the timeline. The story literally tells you the king's fate in the history books changes, that his body was never found, that the record itself gets rewritten by her being there. She ends up taking a blow meant for him, and that sacrifice slingshots her back to the present, where she wakes from a coma with a scar down her back matching the wound. And then, because this is a romance, and romances win, he finds his way to her. He turns up in the modern world, of all things, as a restaurant guide inspector, and they finally share the bowl of food they promised each other. Full circle. Love outruns history. The tyrant gets a table for two and a second chance. It is a lovely ending. It is also the exact inverse of the truth. So let me give you the real one. So how does a king this powerful actually get pulled down? The show gives you palace schemers and a righteous rival prince. The real trigger is stranger, sadder, and gloriously murky, which is exactly why I saved it for here. There was a woman remembered by her title, Grand Internal Princess Consort Sumpyeong. She was the widow of Grand Prince Wolsan, Yeonsangun's own uncle, and by several accounts, she had helped raise Yeonsangun himself, a foster mother, essentially. He heaped honors on her, gave her his old residence, and visited her constantly. And then the whispers began. A scandal spread through the court that the king had committed adultery with her, the aunt who had mothered him, and the rumor went darker still, that she conceived a child and buried in shame took her own life in the summer of 1506. Now here is where I have to do the honest thing, because the record genuinely wrestles with itself on this one. She was over 50 years old at the time, which makes the pregnancy story very hard to swallow. And a number of scholars suspect the whole scandal was invented, or at least wildly inflated after the fact. By whom? By her own brother. Because her brother was a man named Park Won-jong, and Park Won-jong became one of the ringleaders of the coup that toppled Yeonsangun. So take your pick of nightmares. Either the king truly assaulted the aunt who raised him and drove her to her end, or a powerful, ambitious man took his sister's passing and forged it into a moral justification for seizing the state. Maybe some of both. The truth went into the ground with everyone who was actually in those rooms, and all we're left with is the shape of the wound. Either way, by that summer, she was gone. Her brother was furious and connected and done waiting, and the court had finally reached its limit. This is where the fairy tale and the record tear apart for good. It came in 1506, his 12th year on the throne. A group of senior officials, men whose names history actually bothered to keep, Park Won-jong, Song Hui-an, and others, launched their coup. They did not negotiate with him. They deposed him. They pulled him off the throne and put his younger half-brother there instead, a man who became King Jeongjong. Koreans call it the Jeongjong Restoration. The moment the dynasty pulled itself back from the edge, this one man had dragged it to. There was no eclipse, no sacrifice, no reunion. Yeonsangun was stripped of the crown, demoted to a mere prince, and exiled to Ganghwa Island. And there, roughly 2 months later, he was gone. He was about 29 years old, a young man in exile, alone, at the end of the shortest possible fall. And the cruelty did not stop with him, because the state that removed him wanted no seed of him left. Within weeks, his young sons were ordered to drink poison, the same end his mother was given. The same fate that had started this whole spiral came all the way back around and swallowed his children too. That is the actual shape of this story. It does not end with a table for two. It ends with a family erased by the exact poison it was born screaming about. And his favorite, Jang Nok-soo, the real woman under the drama's villain. When the coup came, she was dragged into the streets of Jongno, the beating heart of the capital, and met her end in public. And the accounts say an ordinary crowd hurled stones at her. The people she'd lorded over got the last word with their hands. Not one soft ending in the entire real cast. Just the machine, grinding everyone who wrote it into the ground. When it was all over, they denied him a temple name. No honored title. No place in the proud line of Jongs and Joes. Just Gun. Prince. Demoted forever
in the one place a king cannot escape, his own name. 500 years later, we still can't say who he was without saying in the same breath that he was not fit to be called king. History gave him the coldest possible sentence. It made his disgrace part of how we're allowed to speak of him at all. And it cuts one layer deeper than the name, which I did not even know until I went digging for this. Every legitimate Joseon king has his reign preserved in the veritable records, the Silok, one of the most obsessively detailed historical archives any civilization has ever produced, a UNESCO treasure. Yeonsangun does not get a Silok. His 12 years are filed under a different word entirely. They're called the Yeonsangun Diary. A diary. Not the records of a reign, just the scribbles of a deposed prince who happened to sit on a chair for a while. Even the archive that remembers him refuses to dignify what he did as a rule. He is erased twice, once in his name and once in the very shelf his story sits on. And here is the gut punch for anyone hoping this ends with the good guys riding in to save the day. Pulling him off the throne did not cleanse anything. The same powerful nobles who overthrew him turned right around, and under the new king Jeongjong, crushed the next generation of idealists, eliminating a brilliant young reformer named Jo Gwang-jo in yet another purge barely a decade later. The system that produced Yeonsangun outlived Yeonsangun. Removing one monster did not fix the machine that let a monster reign for 12 years. It just changed which hand was on the lever. So here is what I keep turning over, and I want to leave you with it. The drama did something we do all the time now. It took a real monster and asked us to imagine his softer timeline. And that's not evil exactly, it's human. We want the wound to explain the man, and we want love to be strong enough to fix him. But the real Yeonsangun is a warning about exactly that instinct. He was a wounded boy, he genuinely was. He was lied to, robbed of his mother, handed a horror as an inheritance. And he took every ounce of that real pain and turned it outward onto everyone weaker than him. On scholars, on women, on his own grandmother, on an entire kingdom, until the country had to physically tear the crown off his head to survive him. The wound was real. It was never an excuse. Both of those things are true at once, and the drama can only hold the first one. That's the thing about turning a tyrant into a love interest. The food looks incredible, the lighting is soft, the trauma makes him sympathetic. And somewhere out past the edge of the frame, 20,000 families are being thrown out of their homes, a woman is drinking poison, and an alphabet is being fed to a fire. The real history isn't here to ruin the show for you. It's here so that when you feel yourself falling for the beautiful, sad king, you remember there's a reason they had to change his name before you could.
Now I want to hear you. Team happy ending or team give me the real one with all the sharp edges left in? And which K-drama do you think has done the most to make an actual historical monster swoon-worthy? Drop it in the comments, fight nicely, and I'll be reading every one. If this rewired how you see the show, hit subscribe, because next time we're pulling apart another drama that lied to you gorgeously. I'll see you there.